Initially, I wasn't going to try to push to get this transmission temperature gauge installed before the trip to Florida, but it's just nagging at me, the peace of mind that I would get from having it. So what I'm going to do is try to install it. I'll just go over a quick overview of the parts. I'll go ahead and have these listed below in the video description. But I've got a circuit tester, which is going to allow me to use these ADA circuits to tap into power. Bought these extra fuses to kind of have in the car, but also so I can add a fuse to the electric lines going to the sensor and the gauge here. The gauge that I chose for this build is the FST 8211. It's a water or transmission temperature gauge. This sensor and a set of adapters comes with it, with the temperature gauge, but you need the 3/8 fitting plus a temperature sensor. Then you need to get this 3/8 T and then the 3/8 hose adapters. I bought these hose clamps here, just give them a try. I've never used these twist style ones. Could be good, could be bad. I already have the transmission temperature, or the transmission cooler, the second one, installed in the Pilot. It's just installed with push through zip ties, and if you look it up online, you'll be able to figure out how to install that pretty easily. I'm gonna just try to work from underneath the front, and then I'm gonna try to poke a hole in the firewall to get the wiring through into the cabin. And I'm going to try to just make this a quick one, so I'll let you know how it goes. I'm going to go ahead and start by putting some thread sealing tape on these fittings here. Alright, so I'm not the best electrician, but this is my understanding of how this needs to be wired. The sensor itself needs to be grounded. Let's see here. Yes. So it needs to be grounded, so I'm using this large adapter here to go around the base of the outside of the sensor, and then this center post, let's see if I can get it in focus here. This center post, if you see that rubber in there, it's insulated. That's where the feed goes to the gauge itself, and then the gauge will be grounded as well, and then tap into the power from the fuse box. So this is kind of how I'm setting it up. I'm probably going to have to put another washer underneath this just to make it, you know, fit tight, because there was a gap when I tightened it. But that's how I'm running it. I'll show another picture once I get the wires kind of coming out of it. Okay, so I'm installing the ground. I just used another one of these crimp-on adapters here. So I'm going to just attach this here. This will go down to the grounding portion of the sensor. So for right now, just attach this like this. For right now, what I'd like to do is zip tie this to these grounding cables and just throw it down to the front. I'm just going to let it fall down the center, and it'll be just right there in arm's reach once we get under the car. Next thing I'm going to try to do is poke a hole in the firewall right here. Supposedly you can just take a hard wire and poke right through this grommet right here, and it'll go just down underneath the dash on the driver's side. So I'm going to try that right now. I didn't find any of my stiffer wire, so I'm actually going to just use a welding rod. So here's my welding rod poker, just duct taped to my wire. Let's see if I can get it to poke through that firewall and down where I need it. So my welding rod is right up here where my finger is. That's kind of where it comes out, right above there. My first attempt through the firewall didn't succeed, so now I've made a loop on this end and a loop on this end and fastened it with the duct tape. I'm gonna have to pull it a little harder, but we're really close. All right, so I'm trying to decide where to put this gauge, and I know someone has put it here in the past. I don't like how I can't see it through the steering wheel. For me, this spot right here is more visible. It's still kind of hidden by the steering wheel. And so anyways, so I felt behind here. There's nothing really behind here. Maybe a little bit that could interfere. But I pulled this just to see how hard it would be to take this piece off, and it comes out so easy. So I'm gonna get to work tracing the shape I need and starting to cut the hole. I'm gonna have to cut it with
a drill to start with, and then with a Dremel. I don't have a hole saw, and I'm not spending $20 to get the exact right one, so wish me luck. I used the bezel that it came with to trace this hole, and I'm gonna get started cutting away at the inside of it till I have it close to fitting through. I've started out by just drilling some holes in it, whipping out the Dremel now. Alright, so here's the finished hole. I learned a valuable lesson. When you're using the Dremel, don't enter it from this side, because when you slip, it'll come down the face. I got a little scratch right there. It won't be very obvious, so I don't really care. But if you come from the inside and use the Dremel, you can actually watch it get close to your line, and it works really well. So here it is with the sensor and the inside. It fits pretty tight without the... So also there is going to be a little bit of a gap if you can see it from the top and bottom. I don't think it's going to be very obvious from the front, and I am going to put this bracket back on the back, so let's kind of see what that looks like. There's not a lot of room behind this area, so let's see if I can kind of show you. So I actually notched out the area behind where the light bulb hangs back on this unit. I may or may not hook up the light bulb today. I'm mostly interested in getting functionality. I also had to ditch the bracket. The way I've got this fit, it fits in pretty tight. I don't really see it popping out, and I'm not going to worry about how it's rotated and stuff also because of that, because I can always rotate it later. Eventually I might glue it in. That would keep it from moving. From the extreme side, you can see there's a little bit of a gap at the top, but pretty much any other viewing angle, maybe other than the passenger, it looks pretty good. I might address that in the future, but for right now, I'm satisfied with this. I'm just gonna focus on getting the wires run. So if I take this out, I can kind of show you what I'm looking for. So for the unit itself, the spot that says S is for sensor. Negative, I need to ground to the body of the vehicle. I'll find a screw to run a wire to. Positive needs to go to a positive power source, which I'm going to tap into a fuse that has power only when the key is in, like on the on position or turned on. So that's basically what I'm going to use my little circuit tester to do. Alright, so I'm tapping into a ground right here behind where the gauge is going to be. The screw was painted black, so I did my best with the Dremel just to kind of grind off as much paint as I could. And I just put, you know, 2 fittings on each end so I can connect it. We'll have to see if it's a good grounding source or not. So I drilled a tiny hole here so I can fish wires down through the dash a little bit more easily for a little cleaner install in the end. I've got the light hooked up to the grounding wire here, and then ground of course going to that bolt back there. I'm going to run the sensor wire up through this hole. I'm going to fish it up through this hole by just taping it to the wire I've already put in. I'll pull it up through there, and then I'll just fish this wire down through again. So that's a little tip. It's coming along well so far. Alright, so I've got all the wires on the gauge. They're all hanging down here. I've been sure to splice the one that powers the gauge, and the one that powers the light is not spliced, so I can remember the difference. This plastic piece kind of comes in best from the top. There's actually not a lot of working room between the transmission knob there, but I am just about to get it in place. It's looking good. Once I get it in place, I'll shove in the different wires, kind of pull them down, and we're going to move over to the fuse box, try to find where we've got power. So for those who don't know, this little circuit detector here, all you do is hook it to a grounding source, and then at the top of each fuse, let's see if I can get a good angle on this. It's gonna be hard to see. But at the top of each fuse, there's a piece of metal, and you just touch it, and then if it connects the circuit, then it lights up. So I'm going to do that. I'm going to find 2 fuses, one that has power when the car's on, that's going to power the gauge, and then one that has power only when the headlights are on.
So I didn't find a light, or sorry, I didn't find a fuse that's going to work for the backlight, at least not down in the underneath the dash here. So I'll figure out the light another time. Right now I'm just mostly worried about powering up the gauge and getting the sensor installed. So for right now I'm going to tap into the daylight running lights fuse with the added circuit. From the firewall I routed the sensor wire down and around, and then took a similar path to the ground cable straight down. Now all that's left to do is to splice in the sensor and to loop in the 2 transmission coolers. So the transmission fluid is going to come out of the transmission into this first external transmission cooler, straight into the second transmission cooler, out that transmission cooler into the internal transmission cooler, and then into the transmission. So it'll be routed through a whole bunch of transmission coolers, hopefully keeping my transmission temperatures nice and cool despite running oversized tires and pulling a boat. Fingers crossed, right? From the best I can tell on the internet, the transmission line that is towards the back of the car is the hot transmission line. That's the one coming out, and the one returning is towards the front of the car. So what I'm going to do is splice in my sensor right here and see how much leakage I get doing that, and then I'll move on to the next part. Okay, so I was able to splice in my sensor, the T-fitting. I was able to get my ground wire clamped in and my power wire. They both feel tight, good to go. Now I just got to loop in my other trans cooler up here. Would have been like 9,000 times easier to do this if I had the bumper cover off, but I was able to kind of work my hands up in here and route the cables so that it goes from the sensor to the external transmission cooler here, out that one into the other one, out that one into the radiator internal transmission cooler, and out there into the transmission. So right now what I'm going to do is hose everything off. Actually, wait. I decided that I'm going to go ahead and wire the light on the gauge and see how bright it is. I am going to be driving at the start of this trip at night, so may as well have the light working, I guess, at the beginning, unless it's blinding me. So I couldn't leave well enough alone. I went ahead and cleared the space behind the gauge here so it would fit as flush as possible. So now from the sides, it looks very acceptable. The only place you could see any kind of opening would be the top or just the bottom. But for me, pretty happy. Again, I know it's not in the most ideal location with the steering wheel up, but it is better than this side from my point of view for visibility. And I can still see it. So maybe a Lenny can't, or maybe a shorter person can't, but pretty tall, so I can see over that just fine. And I am gonna hook up the light. Our beginning of our journey tomorrow will be at night. All right, time to see if there's any life coming from this transmission sensor here. All right, so the needle moved a little bit. Now we just need to find out, does it move up as the temperature increases in the transmission? The light doesn't look too bright, so that's good. I think I'm just gonna run it with the light full time for right now. I just went for a short drive to the gas station and back, and as you can see, the temperature of the transmission is climbing. And now I'll be able to keep an eye on it. Hopefully it doesn't max out there at 280. That wouldn't be good. That wraps up the last mod that I wanted to make before my trip to Florida. So far, I've gotten the front hitch receiver done, got my new tires, new wheels. I got my transmission cooler and temperature gauge installed, or we should be all set, as well as I can at least. And yeah, so stay tuned for some Florida footage, and thank you for watching the videos, guys. Catch you later.